That's it. I've had it. I'm going to be planting an herb planter right next to my house. The last thing that I want to do when I'm in the middle of cooking is to run out into the garden and collect a bunch of herbs that I need for my dish, especially at night. That's why this elevated garden bed that's actually movable from Vego Garden seems to check all the boxes for me. Hey folks, if we haven't met before, my name is Tara and I garden in the Bay Area, and I am no stranger to elevated garden beds. In fact, I've had this old wooden one for at least 3 years now, and I've made several videos about this planter, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there's a lot of ugly that I am hoping that this new elevated raised bed from Vego Garden is going to check for me, because one of the biggest things that I don't like about this bed is the quality leaves much to be desired, and Vego Garden is known for its quality products. So I am excited to unbox this thing. I've actually already done that. I've laid it all out on the ground and I've checked all the pieces, and now I'm going to put it together. And they say I should be able to put it together in 30 minutes. So let's check that out first. We'll also talk about what I like about this planter and maybe some of the wish list items, and then we're going to plant it up with, yes, you guessed it, my favorite herbs and one surprising little thing. And I'm going to explain to you how I plan my planter for success. What are the criteria that I look for in order for it to grow really well? Because like I said, I've got some good experience growing in these elevated planters, and it's a little bit different. There are some things to pay attention to. And then we'll wrap it up with some FAQs, because I know I had a lot of questions when I first started in elevated raised garden beds.
Okay, let's put this thing together, and while I do that, I want to share with you a few things about this planter that really got my attention. First off, I just love that it's elevated. It is so much easier on the back, and hey, I'm not getting any younger. And it's also great for people with ability issues, so much easier to plant and harvest and just navigate, just so much easier than having to bend down and do it on the ground. I also love that it has the option of getting wheels. Now that will make it so much easier to move around. Say if I want to have better access to sunshine, or even move it to a different spot around my house. Because once you fill this thing up with soil, it is going to be too heavy to move without the wheels. And one more thing, I have a lot of problems with rats and squirrels, and with this planter's nice, sleek, shiny legs, they're going to have a little bit of difficulty climbing up. Yeah, they can get to it if they want to, but I have a feeling that they're going to go after something that's easier than to try and climb up this planter and get to what's in it. Now, they're not going to enjoy the herbs that I'm planting in here, but you can plant so much more in this planter. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, pretty much anything. And the quality of this thing, true to Vego, it is solid. A proprietary alloy and a powder coat paint which will resist rusting. I can expect to use this planter for at least 20 years. And a great price point, you guys, especially for something that I know I'm going to be using a lot, and that's also going to give me a lot of joy. Okay, so it is all put together. It took me roughly an hour, give or take, to put it all together, and that is definitely more than the 30 minutes that it says in the manual, and there's a few reasons for that. The first reason has to do with the manual itself. It is a very detailed manual, very well documented, and you have to read the manual from front page to back page, because there are so many steps that you need to get right, and it's easy to mess up. The orientation, what screws you use, what order you put the parts together, just so many details. And I found myself checking over and over again during the course of this while I put it together, even though I had spent time beforehand reading through the manual. So yeah, super important. And if you're not a handy person, if this stuff doesn't come naturally to you, even all the more reason for you to read the manual. And if you don't read the manual, or you don't read it sufficiently or carefully enough, you will find yourself making mistakes. I did make a few mistakes, and it takes a while to undo those mistakes and redo them, and that really adds on to the time that it'll take to set up your planter. And thirdly, there are a lot of parts
that go together, and there are a lot of small parts like screws, the hardware, etc. There's at least 3 different types of screws and some other things that you need to make sure you're putting them in the right places, and if you don't, you're gonna have to unscrew them and redo them. And then also those tiny screws, you'll keep dropping them and then you have to reach over and try to get them. It's just really helpful to have someone else help you if you've got someone else at home. And for me, my husband usually puts these things together, but I was determined to do this by myself, so I didn't ask for any help. And I found myself, trying to hold things together and screw them on at the same time. It was just awkward. I did it. It's not necessary to have someone else, but just know that it's going to take you more time if you do it all by yourself. And yeah, I also got the wheels, so that took an extra 10 minutes to put together. But I wanted to show you guys these wheels. Look at them and contrast them to my other planter sitting next to it. These are some solid wheels. Now, I'm always nervous about moving this planter. In fact, I haven't even attempted to do it because I'm afraid the bottom will fall out. No problem at all with this planter. It is solid. It's not going to fall out. In fact, I've seen videos where the Vego Garden folks are taking people sitting in this, kind of pushing them around. So this is a solid, really, really strong planter. And check out this shelf, you guys. So thoughtful. My husband actually had to make a shelf for me. You can see how much I'm using it right now to harden off seedlings, but I've often got a watering can, tools, things like that. This shelf, it's not just a nice to have, it's a must have for me. Okay, now let's go ahead and set up the planter. But before we do that, I wanted to remind you that I actually have a discount code to this planter. I've got an affiliate link, so please go ahead and check that out and get the discount. It's a nice discount, and I'll tell you that the price of it is a really, really great value compared to some of the other planters that I've seen. This thing is going to last you 20 plus years, guys. It is worth the investment. So there are a few things, like I mentioned earlier, that are a little bit different about these elevated planters compared to your regular container gardens. So I want to alert you to that. The first has to do with the soil. Now, the soil in this planter needs to be really lightweight. You can see that I've got plenty of perlite. All of that white stuff in there is perlite, and that makes it really light. So yes, even though you can move the planter around, elevated planters are also subject to gravity. Things do tend to settle down hard in those planters. So keep the soil nice and light. Now, I make my own soil mix, and I'll leave a link somewhere here as to how I make my own mixes. But you can buy any potting soil that you like, that you have used in the past and that you love, and add some additional perlite to it. That will lighten up the mix and make it suitable for this planter. Another thing I wanted to draw your attention to was this does hold a lot of soil. In fact, it's about, I think it's a foot tall, which is sufficient to grow most plants. You can grow your tomatoes, your peppers, your herbs, you can grow pretty much anything. Now, you don't want to grow very tall tomatoes because this planter is already elevated, but yeah, the amount of soil that this contains is sufficient for you to grow plenty of different kinds of vegetables. So do not use branches and wood pieces and all of that to make up the bulk. Plants need 1 foot of soil at least for their roots to be able to thrive, and you don't want them coming in contact with all kinds of other stuff that is going to compete with the plant roots for nitrogen and other nutrients while they break down. Okay, let's go ahead and fill this up. I sure hope I've made enough potting soil. You guys, of course, I ran out of homemade potting mix and I had to make some more. And rather than make it in that wheelbarrow that I mixed it up in, I actually decided that I was going to mix it in this. And I'll tell you guys, it is so much more convenient to mix at this elevated height than it is to bend over a wheelbarrow. So I filled it up almost to the top, and it still moves like butter. It's a beautiful thing. And I'm going to be adding fertilizer. Now, I just use a slow release fertilizer, and I scratch it into the top couple of inches of soil. Particularly in planters, you want to make sure that your fertilizer is not all the way down at the bottom, because it's just going to get washed out when you water it. So just the top 2 inches or so, especially when you're first setting up your planter, you want to put a good few handfuls. You can see I'm adding probably more than I typically would, but this is only for the first time. And then halfway through the grow cycle, I'll come and add a little bit more again on the surface and kind of just scratch it in. So we're done with the hard part, and now we're on to the fun part, which is planting up the planter. So I'm going to share with you some tips on how I organize my thoughts around planning this planter, and then we'll wrap it up with a few FAQs. But before we do that, I want to share with you just a few things, a few wish list items, if you will, that I would like to have gotten along with this planter. The first item is irrigation. Now, I have installed some irrigation that I had already, but Vego Garden actually sells something very similar to this, better actually, because you can turn each of them on and off individually, which I can't with my setup. The other thing that I would like to have at some point is a trellising system. So I've hacked together a trellising system on this planter to run my sweet peas up, and I have grown cucumbers as well very successfully over here. So I would love to have a trellis. Again, Vego Garden does sell a trellis for this thing, I just don't have it. The third item is insect netting. Now, again, Vego Garden does sell this, but if I'm planting like winter vegetables that are prone to aphids and things like that, cabbage moths, it would be really nice to have insect netting. Okay, let's plant this puppy up. Now, one of the main things you want to consider when you plant in a relatively small planter, this is not very, very large, you want to make sure that the watering needs of the plants that you're putting in here are similar. So as an example, I'm holding rosemary in my hand. I cannot plant this along with things like basil or onions because they're going to need much more water, and this little thing is going to rot with that much water. The second thing that you need to consider is to plant plants that have similar feeding needs. So in other words, you want to plant something that will not hog from its neighbor. For example, you do not want to plant a large tomato plant or pepper plant, which are going to be nutrition hogs, along with something like onions, which are going to absolutely give up and they're not going to compete and they're going to do very, very poorly. Another item that deserves a rule all in itself is mint. No, mint cannot be planted in your herb garden. Mint is in a pot and it's going to stay in a pot. It is very insidious. It will take over the entire planter and it kind of crawls around. It'll hog nutrients and it will choke out all your other plants. Keep mint close by, but in its own pot. And then finally, you want to organize these so that they do not shade each other out. It's not going to be much of an issue for me because I'm growing herbs that don't grow very tall. But in the past, I have grown things like tomato plants and basil plants. I know they're supposed to be great companions, but the basil as well as the little pepper plant that I put next to the tomato just did not do as well because the tomato plant just grew huge and shaded the whole thing out. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, let's go ahead and set these up. I'm going to be planting my alliums, my onions and chives, etc. in about a third of the bed, and the rest of the herbs are going to be on the other side. So I like to lay them out first. By the way, these are garlics from last year that I forgot to pull out, so I dug them out from my garden. When they're clumped together like this, you are best off kind of soaking them for a while, and then they will actually come apart pretty easily. So I'm going to be growing these mainly for the greens, not necessarily for the bulb. I've got some dill that I'm going to be putting in the back because they might get fairly tall. I've got marigolds that are going to go in the front. I've got a couple of clumps of parsley. One of them is curly leaf, one of them is flat leafed. I've got thyme that's going to also go along the edge. I've got oregano, which also needs to go at the edge. Rosemary ain't going in here. And then finally, I've got a couple of different kinds of basil. Let's start with the marigolds because you absolutely need to plant flowers in your planters. We're all done planting up, and as my mother always said, give it some uyurutani or water of life as soon as you plant anything new. By the way, when I was planting this up, I put a little surprise plant in there. Did you notice what it was? If so, leave a comment below on what you thought it was. I'm starting to feel some raindrops falling on my head, so I am actually going to move this planter over to there where it's got a little bit of overhang so it protects it from the rain so my baby seedlings don't get crushed with the raindrops. Let's see how easily I can move it, okay? Oh my goodness, that was so easy! Easy peasy apple squeezy, as my kids would say. Now onto the FAQs. The first question is, can I grow large plants in this? Say tomato plants, pepper plants. We talked about that earlier. Yes, you can, but the big caveat is you need to make sure that you provide it with regular water and regular fertilization. You can't skimp on those two routines because this planter is not terribly big. So if you plant, say, 2 tomato plants and maybe a small pepper plant, they're going to drink and eat all the nutrition very, very quickly, and you're going to have to keep replenishing. So keep that in mind if you're growing larger plants. And don't grow them too tall as well because you can't reach. This one is already elevated. You're going to have to get a step stool or something like that. I grew cucumbers in the other planter, and they grew just phenomenally well. But of course, I had to climb up and try to get them down. The second question is about perennials. Can you grow perennials? All these herbs, for the most part, except maybe the Genovese basil, they're all perennials. However, I would treat them as annuals. In other words, you do need to pull them out, trim the roots, and plant them back every single year, because they will grow massive roots and they will eventually not do well. Back to that container and limited capacity. So ideally, you don't want to grow things as perennials in these containers. Then the other reason for that is the soil does compact a lot more in these elevated planters over time, so perennials, they won't do well. And speaking of soil compacting, that is something that you do need to do whenever you replenish this planter. And I do that actually roughly every time I change seasons. So from summer to winter, I would fluff up the soil, add some more soil amendments, maybe throw in some perlite, definitely some fertilizer, and just kind of loosen up the soil and get it breathing again. And then finally, about the planter itself. This is a metal planter, and some people wonder whether that metal is going to leach heavy metals into their edible plants. Now, Vego Garden has done a very thorough job of making sure that it does not do that, and so it's very non-toxic. They've got certifications on their website. I would be wary if you buy from other vendors that don't have those certifications, because the process of galvanization does involve lead, as far as I can remember, and other heavy metals as well. So you definitely want to make sure that this is food grade and certified food grade. And then the other question is about the temperature. These are metal planters. Does it overheat? And I live in California. Now, I have not experienced it with my galvanized planters that they've heated up too much. I do tend not to plant them too close to the edge of the planter, and that probably helps, but no, it doesn't make much of a difference as far as the temperature goes. So I've done an herb planter this time, but I would love your ideas for other theme gardens. I don't know, pizza garden or a salsa garden or whatever else, something that you'd like me to try over here, and I'll try and do it. So leave a comment below. And speaking of herb planters, I made a video over the winter on an herb planter, also from Vego Garden, that I grew on my kitchen windowsill. It did phenomenally well. I had basil and cilantro and all kinds of good stuff. Lettuce on my kitchen windowsill during winter. And I think you'll really enjoy it. I'll put a link to it right here. So once again, I do have an affiliate link and a fabulous discount code in the description if you want to buy this gorgeous planter. And follow along. I'm going to be posting regular updates to show you how it's doing. And I just know it's going to do fabulous. Don't jinx it, Tara.